Okay, welcome to Stampscaping 101. This is a scene that I just stamped out for kind of a new style of some videos that I'll be doing in the future. Kind of more of a stamp-along type of format for those brand new to the line, or to scenic stamping, or just to this technique of some glossy paper, dye-based inks that I happen to use in a lot of the videos. But what I did on this scene right here was just a really basic composition using a sky element, a main image, and some foreground. Okay, and I taught it I did this scene in a way that I would be teaching people in my workshops that I used to give. I haven't done them in a long time, but I would just have people, basically pick a couple of different elements, land, sky, and with a color scheme that they were going to be using, in this case blues, I'd have them pick out their light, medium, and dark color, and stamp out their sky figure in one of the colors out of the color scheme, but I would recommend to them to go with a medium to dark tone, and I explain that in the video. Stamp it out, add some color around it, using those, the colors out of their color scheme. In this case it was the mementos. And after they did that, I would have them just stamp out their main image in black. Okay, it's just a really simple type of silhouette type of scene. Just adding that out in dark, and then adding some sort of foreground in there. Okay. Now on a scene like this, if I was to be stamping this out in one of my other instructional videos, I'd be going with some darker tones out there and bringing in some black on the surrounding areas. Probably adding in some, foggy touches in here and adding in some kind of gel pen highlights. But this is the foundation right here for, any type of composition, and it's just in a really simple kind of step-by-step process that I would take people through. But after people did this in a workshop, they would, most of the times they'd be completely comfortable, even if they had never stamped this type of technique or done any scenic stamping before. And then they would just pick out whatever types of imagery they wanted to go with. Okay. Land element, whatever. Mountains. And then they would pick out some kind of sky element, and these are completely interchangeable. Any type of thing, stars, whatever. And what I would recommend to them after doing the blue tone scheme, color scheme, is to pick out a different color scheme. Let's say they were going with something like a spring meadow or something like that. Then I would just have them pick out their pads, light, mediums, and darks within that given color scheme, and start off with their lightest tones and work through their color scheme into their darker tones. But it'd be the exact same technique, but just with a different composition and maybe some different imagery. All right. So this is a kind of a stamp along type of video, like I mentioned. So if you choose to kind of go along with this scene for those new to scenic stamping, or just this technique right here, you can kind of take it one step at a time. You don't have to use the exact same imagery, and I explain that in the video. But just kind of get to a certain point and pause the video if you need to get caught up with a certain color scheme that, or color that you're adding into the scene, and just resume as we get into the other and so in colors or the other imagery that's been added into the scene. And I'll explain things like how to retain some of this lightness as we go along in this video here. So anyways, if you choose to stamp along in the video, I hope you enjoy the process and have a lot of fun. If you ever have any questions, just drop us a question in the comments below. Okay, thanks for watching. Okay, to start off with one of these stamp-along videos, what we'll need is some sort of main image, okay? These are wood-mounted ones. You can use unmounted, whatever you want. But basically what I would have my students start off with on their first card that they stamped out in a workshop would be, I would have them pick out some kind of main image. The main images are typically the larger ones, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, we could just do a bunch of grass in a field or something like that, and a sky. But I would have them pick out one of the main elements. Just to make things easier, I'd have them go for one of the G-size images because it would fill up, most of a card space, and they wouldn't have to worry about the surrounding areas, but you certainly can do that. And the next thing I would have them do is to pick out some kind of sky image to go with their main image. So if it's this, river, Lakeside Cove, autumn brook, pines and rocks, or something like that, and you'll want to pick out something to go in the sky. All right, clouds. These are all interchangeable. Okay, could just be a bunch of clouds, something like that. Now, that's not to say that every scene has to have some kind of sky element, but it was just an easy way to start off with, where the student only had to worry about two different elements, one land element and one thing to go in the sky. All right? So let's just go with, let's see, we'll go with one of these. Why don't I go with the hot sun? But I'll do the hot sun in blues, and thus kind of turning it into a moon of sorts because of the hue. And let's just keep things really basic right here. I tend to see this Lakeside Cove as one of the most basic of stamps that we have in the line. It's been one of the more popular ones over the years. If you have that, you can use that if you want to. And any kind of sky element, okay? Doesn't have to be a Stampscapes design either. You can mix and match. The main image doesn't have to be a Stampscape stamp. You can mix it with the Stampscape sky. Anything, okay? But now, now the card I'm going to be working on is a 1/4 page card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And let's see. What we'll do is I would have my students start off with some kind of sky element, and before we started stamping, I would typically go into how I use my colors. We would pull out a bunch of stamp pads, and I would show them how I'd line things up, going from light to dark in any given hue that I was going to use in a scene. If I'm going to do something in yellows and greens, like for a grass, I might pull out all the greens that I had and kind of line them up going from light to dark, okay? A blue color scheme is one of the most simple ones to go with. Most people have some variations of blue within their dye-based inks. Light, medium, and dark, okay? This one happens to be the Mementos. Here's the Marvy pads, light, medium, dark, okay? And I would just have them pull out those. Going back to our composition here, what I'm going to do is I would say just, all right, now in your first color, you're going to want to stamp out your sky figure in one of the colors out of your color scheme. If we're going with blues, my typical thing on people's first stamps, first impressions with this would be to go with a medium to dark one. You could go with a light one, but we're going to be running a lot of different colors in here, and if it was someone's first scene that they've done, I didn't want them to stamp their imagery out in the lightest of colors, because when we start running our colors over it, I want that image to, them to retain the image in there. So I'd typically have them start off with one of the darker tones. In this case, why don't I go with the darkest one, dark blue. The medium blue would be great too. Okay. Now, I'm not going to bother with the reflection in this one. A lot of times in water scenes, I kind of stamp out, the sky figure twice, to represent some sort of reflection. You can stamp it out portrait or landscape, whatever way you want to go with. I'm going to go with portrait just so that my Lakeside Cove kind of fills up the entire area. From side to side, there might be a little bit of space on each side, but not a big deal. And we'll go about like so. Okay, now here's the thing too. On people's first scenes that they've done, I would typically have them just stamp their sky figure out, because this would be the first scene as far as this technique goes, where they would be doing some coloring, and I didn't want them to have to worry about other types of imagery that are already in here, meaning the land thing. Okay, so in this stamp along video, what we'll do is we'll stamp out our sky image. I would put it somewhere, up towards the top. Stamp it out in one of your medium or darker tones and get it in there. And what we'll do is we'll start coloring in the scene next, okay? So anytime you're ready to pause this and get to that point, you can. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take some sort of sponging tool. You can use a stylus tool like this one. It has the different sponge tips. These just pop out like this. Put in another one, like so. If you have cosmetic sponges, you can use those. Alright? Come in these little makeup wedges right here. They work pretty good. Resist crumbling. These are the types of things that we used to use before these types of things were out there. I find these to be nice and ergonomic. Okay, now here's the thing that you're going to do. You're going to basically fill in most of this area around the moon, okay? Okay, a little pause there. Just had a UPS delivery of a bunch of instructional postcards that we send out with orders. Okay, getting back to this, I'm going to fill in most of the area around that moon. If you're using clouds or some imagery with stars on it, what you're going to be basically doing is you're going to be looking at this scene right here, your impression, and figuring out what areas do you want to retain the lightness of, okay? So if it was a cloud like this, and I stamped it, 2 or 3 times, I might want to keep some of these clouds light, like they're capturing some of the light. In this case, this is a moon here. It's a sun if you stamp it in reds and yellows and oranges, but in this case it's going to be a moon, so if that's the moon, that's going to be my light source in the scene. So if that's the case, I don't want to make it too dark, okay? So this is some glossy cardstock, and I'm running in some of this light blue ink. This one's called Summer Sky from Memento. And I'm being careful not to stamp out the lightness of the moon. You could put a little bit of, this is a very, very light blue, so it depends on what blue you're going with right now. Get a feel for it, see how dark it's going to be on your page, but retain a lot of the lightness of it. You can put some of this over it if it's just too stark white. But for the most part, fairly light, I would say. I mean, you can make it moodier, where there's less cast light. But for the sake of this video, instructional video, we'll keep it the white of the paper. Okay, now this is very light, okay, which is a good thing. And sometimes what I'm doing here too, as far as the technique goes, because this is a very thick ink, it's fairly slippery. It doesn't soak into the paper real fast, so I put a big puddle of it down like that, and what I do is I just blend that out like so, and I get more in my kind of swipes that way, okay? And one thing you'll notice here as far as the technique goes, I'm kind of working one area at a time, okay, and I'm blending that color over, so like 1/4 quadrant of the card, okay? So I'm not going in this motion, I'm not going Yeah, I'm not real perimeter oriented like this, like a, I don't know, a record player or something like that, or I don't know, that's not a good description, but what you want to do is you want to work one area out at a time. And that's how you get a nice transition of tones like this. If I kind of do this type of thing, where I'm going more perimeter oriented like that, what happens is I get this hard, you know, fixed perimeter without too much of the transitions going from light to dark, okay? So this is what I'm doing here. Let's go back to this quadrant right here and see how I'm kind of pulling this in like this. I'm working this like this. Get a lot of color on the outside, and then I'm working it in like that. And that's kind of, I don't know, maybe 95% of the motion that I'm doing is always going to be like that. I don't know, the rest of the time I might be tapping like this or something like that, or getting some detail in some little areas, but for the most part, if I'm covering a lot of ground, it's working in one area at a time and getting a full saturation of it. Now, it's more than just coloring with this first color, and this is where, I don't know, about 80% of the questions I have on this technique are, when people get done, sometimes they go through their all of their tones. Sometimes things are a little bit anemic. It's not as vibrant and glowing of a end result as they would have hoped for. And most of the times I can look at it and say, they didn't use enough of the lightest tone. If that's the case, you can always, if you've gone through your darker tones, you can always go back to your lighter one and just put it right over the darker ones, okay? And that'll give it a more full, rich, deep, saturated appearance to it, okay? So get a lot of tone down, and not only color, but kind of saturate your perimeter areas. Okay, now you're not going to have to do that with every color, so the first color is going to take the most amount of time to apply, all right? So if you need to get caught up here on that first color, go ahead and pause this video and we'll get right into the next color, which would be a medium blue, such as the Bahama blue, or if it's the Marvy case, it would be something like a light blue. So basically, if you have other brands of pads, kind of more of a royal blue, I would say. Okay, going on with the medium tone. Anytime you change colors, kind of test it on the edge, and get a feel for it. Not only is it the value of ink, the relative light and darkness of something, but it's also how wet is your pad, The wetter the pad, the more ink you're going to be applying. So if it's a really super juicy pad, a lot of ink in it, you might want to kind of dab on the outer edge a little bit longer before you start coming in, because we don't want to have some kind of like big streak like that right in the middle of here, especially right over your moon. So when I'm going like this, what I'm doing is I'm not going into my moon, okay? It's kind of more of like here, let's see, and I'm taking it and I'm wiping up like that, before I get to that moon, okay? So it's like this and up. Okay, so it's like a pendulum motion like that. It's not straight, it's not a straight line like that and then up. It's more of the swiping motion like that, okay? And what that looks like on here is this. That way I get that kind of trailing off look like that. Okay, so let's do that down here. Okay. And that's what you just keep doing. And again, I'm kind of going more from the outside edge in a very small area or quadrant of the card. So I just keep inking it up and I'm bringing that into the scene. You can kind of leave it a little bit streakier too. You know, this is going to be a water scene, and or even if it's up in the sky, it'll, you know, look like some kind of moisture in the sky, a little bit of fog maybe. If you're using something like this stylus tool, you don't always have to use it flat like this. You can use it on its side to get a thinner streak. Okay. And I've done 1/2 of the scene. Did that quadrant up there too, but let's move on to this area. And this ink is going on even a little bit more smoothly than the previous ink, because the previous ink I was applying that to a bare, dry piece of cardstock. At this point in time, the cardstock is becoming moist and even more saturated with that, with the ink that I'm applying. Okay. So I wouldn't say it's not sloppy wet to the touch or anything like that, but I can just tell the pulp of the paper is getting a little bit more moist. So the more the moisture is kind of sitting on the surface of the paper. Alright, now I've kind of left this area in here just as is. You can tell I've streaked it in from this side, streaked it in from that side. I mean, I could add more if I want to, but what I can do, what I can tell, is that the more ink that I put on this, you know, this perimeter area, if the card isn't getting darker itself, then it means that it's reached its full saturation with that given color, okay, with that given ink that we've used. So if it's just not getting any darker with, you know, additional ink that I apply, then it's time to move on to a darker color to begin with, okay? So if you need to pause the video and get caught up to about this point in time. Now, if you have colored in this whole area here and not retained any of that lightness, don't worry about it. Just keep applying. But maybe when you get to the next color, okay, maybe leave a little bit of area in the middle of your card somewhere where it's lighter than the perimeter, okay? So that's another one of the things. A lot of times when people say, I'm not good with light or retaining the lightness or a lighting scheme within a scene, what they mean is they've colored in the entire area with a given color of ink. So it's just a solid thing of hue, value. There's no variation, okay? But now, that was only 2 colors so far. So let's say we want to create an even greater contrast. Now we're going with this darker blue. It doesn't look too dark blue because I have a lot of the previous blues in this tip right here still, and the ink isn't adhering to the paper as fast as it did with my previous colors because this page is fairly wet. So I'm just kind of wiping wet into wet, so it's not just, you know, a lot of the color isn't sticking to the page. But that's good though, because that makes it kind of a longer process, but it's also a more smoothly applied one, okay? In other words, I'm not getting a harsh streak like, or a shape like this down, okay? Now, if I do put some of that ink down, I could do that shape there, but you can see the paper is fairly wet, so I can just kind of streak that out and not worry about, you know, thumbnail looking print or impression, you know, being caused by that. So that's another reason why you apply enough of the lighter tones, is because when you get to the darker tones, if you get kind of a mark that you don't like, it's just very easy to blend it out. And we want that nice smooth blended transitions in there, unless you're going for something where you want to have this kind of expressionistic you know, texture in there, you know, as far as, you know, something like this dark color goes, or, you know, the shape of this foam tip. Most people don't want to see that, you know, like that, if they're going for that, all right? But that being said, and what I always told people in the workshops, if you have, you know, kind of gotten a shape in here that you don't like, don't worry about it. We have the images to still stamp right into this area here, so some mark like that, you know, is not going to be, you know, some big kind of obtrusive mark that that looks out of place. There's still plenty of things you can do. That's what's good about landscape stamping. You can stamp things over it. It's not like you misstamped, you know, some word stamp or something like a happy birthday and it's smeared or something like that, you know. That's not as easy to kind of cover up, but in landscape stamping we have so many different images. You can just stamp something right over it, a branch or something like that, and it looks fine. Okay, so what we have now is this. I could probably, it could stand to be a little bit darker, and that would look even better. But let's say we have these 3 colors going in here, all right? 3 values of blue. Now what I'm going to do, and if you need to pause this right now, you can do that. But basically what you have is your sky figure and your surrounding area, and it's all kind of blended in with that, you know, the hue of your choice. In this case, it's an easy nighttime type of scene with just blues. But you're going to take whatever land mass you've chosen, your kind of your main imagery, and you're going to stamp it out in black. We could stamp it out in a different color, preferably a very dark one, if you've added in all those different types of colors, but black would be the most amount of contrast against your background, all right? And it would stand out. I would just recommend going with black. Okay, and let's see, I inked this up, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago. I need to see if I have enough ink on this pad. This happens to be a Marvy black. You can use the different types of black that you have. Okay, I'm going to stamp this fairly low in the composition. If I stamped it higher, I think it would kind of, you know, be fitting if I had a reflection of that moon down here, so I'm going to stamp this one a little bit lower. Okay, now, with large stamps, if you're using a large stamp, get plenty of pressure in the center area. Okay, that's what I would always tell people in the workshop. Stand up if you need to. I'm standing up right now. And I'm putting plenty of pressure in the middle here, so I'm kind of going left, you know, middle, right, top to bottom. But also, if you're stamping a scene out in this fashion, in other words, doing the background first and then putting the image over the top, remember, the page is, you know, it's, like I said, it's not wet and damp to the touch, but it is moist, okay? So we want this ink to transfer to the page, all right? Sometimes if you're stamping wet into damp, what happens if you just kind of stamp it really lightly with light pressure and then you pull it off, it's almost like a vacuum. You get a lot of the ink still stuck to the stamp, okay, because it's just kind of pulled right off. So what I'm doing here is I'm letting the ink transfer into those, you know, 3 layers of thick ink that I've already laid down. Now sometimes I would just let this sit for like a minute or 2, but we'll see if it's transferred enough here. It's a little bit lighter than I would have hoped for, you know, but it's okay. I'll show you what I mean. See, a lot of the ink is transferred here, and those trees over there are a little bit lighter, and because of that kind of vacuum thing. So if you have time there, what you might want to do is, and if you've laid down a lot of those inks like that, like I did, just kind of leave that sitting there for another minute or 2, and then just pull it off. Sometimes it almost dries on there, and you have to kind of peel it off the page, but that ink will just, you know, transfer over there. All right, now we have something like that. Now that's your basic foundation of a scene, right? I mean, it could be a complete scene too, but that's how I would start people off. And then what I would typically have them do at this point in time is to add some foreground. What we have right now is our background, with the colors in there. Our foreground is that, but if we add in something even closer to us, like some branches, in this case it's this tall grass stamp, do it in black again. Okay. By adding something even larger, closer, representationally closer to us, what we've done is we've taken that Lakeside Cove, and now that is not the foreground. This is the foreground, so now we have background, midground, foreground right there. If you chose to add in things like birds or something like that flying in the background, then that would also add another layer of depth to the scene. Now on this scene right here too, one of the things that I would do is I would go in, I would let this set up a little bit, and I would go in with some darker tones in the perimeter right here, and maybe even bring in some black with the stylus tool and blend that in, and I think that would look more cohesive as far as the imagery went. But this is the type of card that I would have people do on their first scene in a workshop if they haven't done that type of technique before, or that type of stamping as far as landscape stamping, scenic stamping, whatever you want to call it, where you're incorporating a bunch of separate elements together into one cohesive scene. If you're a stamper, you've used a lot of different stamps on projects before. Words, textures, main imagery, etc., cutouts and things like that, where it's all kind of composed in a certain fashion, sometimes almost like a collage or something like that. But this one, where it comes to scenic stamps, it's the same type of thing, but it has to be a little bit more seamless, almost as if things are put together in a way where it's, it's its own little world or something like that. So again, doing that little bit of overlapping. If I had that sun kind of peeking out from behind there, the trees could be overlapping that, and that moon could be rising from the horizon. But it's just getting people kind of comfortable with the idea of overlapping imagery and repeating the imagery too, if it's something like that grass in the foreground there. So I was teaching people, a few different things here, making your color choices visual, all right, light, mediums, and darks. If you kind of line out your pads in the order that you are going to use them in, it just makes it easier when you start applying these inks, okay, to a scene. If it's a purple scene, I would just have them grab out all their purples, pinks, line them up from light to dark, and that's the order that they would use them on the scenes as far as the color applications go. Okay. Composing of a scene, just kind of picking out a land element, sky element, and just going with those two elements within a scene. I didn't have them worry about things like, okay, what little figure am I going to stamp in here, and what's going to be in the sky? Is it going to be a bird or ducks or something like that? Just start off with two simple things. Stamp your first thing out, sky, in one of the colors. Not that it can't be stamped out in black, too. It would just stand out a little bit more. But stamping it out in a color kind of allowed that imagery to blend in with the surrounding area faster, okay? If I stamp this out in black, I'd still be able to see, this shape of the imagery where it wouldn't be, well blended in with the surrounding area. So I would typically have them started off with a color, all right? Just because it incorporates into the background much faster with the other colors that you bring into it. Okay? Stamp our main image out in black. Don't worry about, coloring your trees green and all that stuff with pens and bringing so much variation into it. And then finishing it off with the foreground imagery like so. Alright, so that is the first stamp along video. I'm just stopping it right there. There are other types of effects. I think in another video what I'll do is I'll we'll work you through some of the different techniques as far as adding things like fog and highlights and all that. I have that in some other videos, but we'll try to keep it more in this other step-by-step stamp along type of format on some of these videos. Some of these other videos I'll just be doing demonstrations of a certain technique or a certain scene and just stamping it, and you can kind of watch along. But if you want to stamp along, this video format might be good for those that are just kind of getting into it or might be curious about the techniques and want to go along at a much slower pace or something like that, to get the real basics down, okay? So anyways, I hope though that little basic type of scene came in handy for anyone kind of new to the series or techniques or whatever, and you might think about wanting to give it a try. So anyways, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed it.